information that's going to help us as far as programming people. Okay, we're going to identify any risk, any contraindications. We're going to find out if they need to go and get medical clearance. It's going to give us information so we'll know at what level to start them and what type of program to start them on. And then we can use it to also motivate individuals by showing them the progress they've made. Okay, because obviously people want to see that they're improving, and when you can show them that by their body fat dropping, or their cardiovascular fitness improving, or their strength improving, all those kinds of things, that's all going to be very important stuff that increases your value as a trainer. Now, when we go through these assessments, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through health risk assessments. So the health risk assessment is used to gather information regarding existing risk factors, okay? Now, each one of these forms, you'll need to know what they're for. So again, the health risk assessment is used to gather information regarding existing risk factors. And with this one, we typically use the PAR-Q form. You don't have to use it. There definitely are other options with that. Let me just take a look real quick here in the book. If you take, let's see here, figure 11-1, you can find that on page 345.
Yeah, it's on there.
Now that is a simplified version of the PAR-Q, okay? That's what you would use as a trainer to be able to determine if a person needs to go get medical clearance or not, all right? The PAR-Q Plus is in the appendix, and it would be on, let me find it back here, the page number for it. It starts on page 802 or 803. Yeah, it starts on page 802, okay, in the appendix. And so where you have the initial 7 questions, but if you answer yes to any one of those questions, then we got to look at going further. And that's what the PAR-Q Plus does. It's got another 2 pages of questions that you're going to answer. If you end up answering yes to any of those questions, the follow-up questions, then yes, you need to have medical clearance. And the purpose of the medical clearance, obviously, is to protect you as a trainer, to make sure that if anything is popping up, that person is going to a doctor. Now, the doctor's not going to tell them not to exercise. I mean, he's going to tell them to exercise, but he may give you guidelines as well that you should use for that individual when they are exercising, okay? So very important to understand that. Companies you work for, they've already got this stuff in place, so that it's going to be kind of already there and predetermined, all right? Now, PAR-Q stands for Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire, okay? Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. So remember that, because there'll be a question that will say something about, what form assesses if a person is ready to start an exercise program. Physical activity readiness, right? It says ready in the question, okay? So tie those together. Now, the health history questionnaire, this is where we get a little bit more in depth, and that one is on page, that's it, starts on page 80. Hold on a second here. It starts on page 806. And this one is going to have a lot of additional information. It's going to talk about exercise habits, dietary habits, sleep, stress, occupation, recreation, hobbies, as well as demographic information on the person's height, weight, sex, the physician's name and number, emergency contact information, all of this, okay? A lot of facilities, again, will have their version of it. This is a pretty good one that NASM has set up, so if you don't have one to use, then you could pull that off the NASM website and be able to use it. And so the health history questionnaire serves to complement the PAR-Q form. That's its purpose. Now, the medical history provides information about known or suspected chronic diseases. So any past injuries, past surgeries, chronic disease, medications, any of that is going to come into play there. If people are on medications, what I always do is I have them bring me a list of their medications. I don't talk to them a whole lot about that because I'm not a pharmacist. I can't pull all this stuff right off the top of my head. I don't have a physician's desk reference, right there in front of me, okay? But afterwards, I'm going to look up their medications. I'm going to look up the side effects of it. I'm going to look up why they're taking it so I understand what that medication is considerably more, okay?
All right.
Now, you've got a list of test termination criteria, and this is on page 352. Now, what this means is if any of these things apply when you're doing fitness testing, you got a person on the bike, you got them on a treadmill, you're doing a step test, you're doing a walk test, whatever, okay? You stop the test immediately. Most of them, with the exception of the last two, you would send that person to a doctor for medical clearance. Now, point numbers 2 and 3 on that list are talking about changes in blood pressure. If you're not in an exercise physiology lab, you're not going to have that person hooked up to a blood pressure monitor. So you're not really going to be able to assess that to find out if that is happening or that's changing. But the other ones, be very, very familiar with and make sure you know. And again, if it comes up, other than those last two, the equipment not working or the client just saying, hey, I just don't want to do this anymore, then I would send them to medical clearance because there's something else going on there that maybe hasn't shown in what we've done with questions, okay? Now, before we move on from here, let's talk about that medical clearance. There's a specific form for medical clearances, okay? And the problem is this. It's so hard for people to get into healthcare, and it costs them a lot of times, just the doctor's visit and so forth. You're going to give them that medical clearance form, and they're going to walk away with it, and you'll have 20% of them come back. That's frustrating because these are people who really, really need it. But as a certified trainer, your hands are kind of tied here. You can't do much outside of that. You just have to follow the steps. So the best thing you can do to increase that person coming back is follow up with them. Call them and ask them if they've got their appointment scheduled, okay? Impress upon them how important it is to get this done so you can start working with them and so you can start really helping them. Very, very important, okay? So really stress that. Do everything you can to get that person back in there to see you, all right? So those are the forms that we go through. Now, once we go through those forms, a person is cleared for exercise, we start doing the fitness assessments. First thing we're going to do is heart rate and blood pressure. These both need to be done at rest. So a person needs to have been seated enough time to have them come back down to a normal heart rate or a normal blood pressure. Legs not crossed, sitting upright in a chair. So you don't want to run into a situation where a person just came up 3 flights of stairs to your office and they sat down and you start checking their heart rate. It's not going to be accurate. Give them a chance to recover. Give them a chance to be at that resting state. So we're going to check the heart rate. We check it at the radial pulse, not the carotid artery. The carotid artery actually has a reflexive action when you put pressure on it where it wants to start pushing harder and beating faster to try to get more blood to the brain, okay, because it's sensing that blood is being stopped, and the brain needs that blood. It's got to have it to sustain life, okay? So this is why the radial pulse is much better. With blood pressure, digital blood pressure cuffs are absolutely fine. Most people use those. I prefer the stethoscope and the sphygmometer. I like using those myself because I like to hear it. I learned that years ago, and I'm old school when it comes to that. I've got my own blood pressure cuff I take with me. I use my own stethoscope. All's good. All right? One of the things with taking blood pressure, make sure you have the right size cuff. Most times you'll have a youth cup, and then you'll have a cuff, and you'll have an adult cuff that ranges from small to extra large, depending upon the person's size of their arm. Okay? Now, if you have one that is too big for the person's arm, it's going to give you a reading that's too low. If you have one that's too small for the person's arm, it's going to give you a reading that is abnormally high. So, really important again. And on the cuffs, they'll normally say it fits an arm of a circumference of like 8 to 12 inches or 8 to 10 inches or whatever. Okay, I don't remember the specific numbers, but just take a look at it. Make sure you got the right one attached. Now we're going to get into body comp measurements. Okay, BMI. Have you ever computed BMI before?
Computed? No.
So if you take a look, first of all, let's take a look at page 358. Page 358 gives you the table for BMI. So anything less than 18.5 is low. They have an increase, so they're underweight. They have an increased disease risk. 18.5 to 24.9 is a healthy weight and a low risk. So what BMI does is it assesses risk, and it assesses basically if you're underweight, normal weight, or overweight. Okay? That's behind BMI. And basically the theory behind it is that a person's weight should be proportional to their height. So when we calculate BMI, there's a formula here on page 358. Now, I've always used the metric formula, which is weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. Okay? And, I use the metric formula as much as I can through life, because, it's what's used a lot overseas, and we're slowly getting converted to that here in the U.S. as well. So I want you to calculate your BMI. So do you know how to convert your weight from pounds to kilograms?
No. I usually just, if I was doing that, I would just search it, like the conversion.
You mean use a conversion chart to convert from pounds to kilograms?
Yeah, but it's not something that I've actively thought about,
Yeah. Okay. So I've given you because it'll look better. I'll tell you, it'll look better if you're a trainer and you understand all this, and you can just run the numbers and boom, here you go. Here's your BMI. So pounds to kilograms, you just divide by 2.5. And it'll be, we use that also with the nutrition, because when we're talking about how many grams of protein per kilogram of body weight and how much water a person should be taking in and things like that, it's all in kilograms. It's all in kilograms. So divide your weight by 2.2, and that gives you the amount of kilos you have. Okay? So I want you to walk through this formula with me. So let's go ahead and do that. You got a calculator?
I'll put it on I'll put an online calculator in there.
How much do you weigh?
Like 130.
I lost you there. How much do you weigh?
130.
130?
Yeah.
Okay, and how tall are you?
5'7".
Yeah, 130 in pounds. How tall are you?
5'7".
5'7"?
Yes.
Oh, 5'6".
7.
All right. So let's first of all convert your weight into 5'7".
Yes.
We got a delay. I don't know what's going on with that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so 5 feet 7. We're going to convert your weight into kilograms first. So I want you to divide 130 by 2.2.
It's 59.09.
Right. And so let's just go ahead and use 59. We can use 59.1. So you kind of round up a little bit, okay?
All right.
Now we need to convert your height into meters, okay? So the first thing we have to do is convert your height into inches. How many inches tall are you? If you're 5 feet 7 inches, how tall are you in total inches?
12 times 5 is 60. 67.
67, exactly, okay? Now we're going to multiply that by 2.54.
It's 170.
Okay, 170.18. Now, to convert to meters, we move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So you would be 1.7 meters tall, okay?
Right.
1.7 meters. Now, to square a number, you multiply it by itself. So we'll multiply 1.7 times 1.7.
2.89.
Okay. Now we're going to divide that into your weight in kilograms. So 59.1 divided by 2.89.
20.4.
Exactly. Okay. Now let's look at that chart, that table on page 358. And 20.4 puts you in a healthy category as far as your weight and a low disease risk. Okay?
Right.
Now, here's the kicker. The more fit a person is, the more muscle mass they have, the less accurate this is. Okay? So we're going to talk about when we would use BMI. I just wanted to walk you through it so you understood how to do it, how to convert, compute that. Okay? Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is waist circumference. And most of these little initial assessments are about health risk. Okay? So you can see how the BMI is about health risk. It'll also tell you if you underweight, normal, or overweight. But the bigger thing is the health risk. So waist circumference, we're going to measure the person's waist at the narrowest point between the rib cage and above the iliac crest. Now the iliac crest is the top of your hip bone, okay? The top of your pelvis. So from there, the narrowest point up to your rib cage. We're going to measure that, all right? And that would be your waist measurement. Once you get that waist measurement, you can go to the table on page 360. And so let's say you have a man whose waist measurement is 52 inches. What would be his risk category?
If it's 52, well, this isn't on the chart, I don't think. So it's low.
Well, it is. So greater than 47.2 inches. Do you see that on page 360 in table 11-3?
Greater than 40. It just, mine's for men. Um. Oh, all right, that makes sense. All right, I see it now.
Okay, you see where I'm talking
Yeah,
about
I
now?
was looking at centimeters. That's why.
Okay. So see,
I
I
was.
threw you by giving you inches instead of centimeters because it was a metric. Okay. So he would be in a very high risk category. Okay. So as he drops and he goes into a low risk, you can show him and say, look, you've gone from the very high risk to only a high risk now, or from a high risk to a low risk. Okay. Again, it's talking about health risk. Okay. Now, the next one we have is what's called a waist to hip ratio. Waist to hip ratio. Okay. Now, the waist to hip ratio, we're going to measure the hip or measure the waist, same way. And then we're going to measure the hips at the widest point above the gluteal fold. Okay. The gluteal fold is where your glutes fold back into the back of your thigh. That crease right there where your buttocks ties into the top of the thigh. So you measure the widest point there, okay? And to get a ratio, you divide the waist measurement by the hip measurement. So let's do one of these. Okay, let's say a person's waist is 36 and the hips are 40, and this is for a woman, okay? So we're going to take 36 and divide it by 40. And that gives you what number?
0.9.
0.9. Okay. Now, so what would be her risk category?
Well, if it's 0. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong. Yeah, right or lower. So it's. Oh, it's high. Is it high?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
It's
it's
high.
high. Yeah.
Okay. Anything 0.86 or higher is high. Okay. So that is another way to assess risk. Now, before we move on, would you do all of these for everybody? You could. It gives you metrics to work with. Okay. I usually use either BMI or skin fold measurements. We're going to talk about those in a minute. I either use BMI or skin fold measurements to assess basically their weight or body composition, okay? And then I use a waist to hip ratio for the health risk. I hardly ever do just a waist circumference measurement. But again, you can do what you want. It's up to you. These are just tools you can use to be able to help a person. Now, when we talk BMI and skin fold, have you ever had skin fold measurements done?
I don't believe so.
Where they use the calipers to pinch your skin and measure how thick it is?
No.
Okay, all right. So let's take a look at page 363. Okay, and on that page, at the very top, it shows a picture of the guy using the calipers and measuring the person's skin fold on what we call the superiliac, okay? And what you're doing is you're pulling the skin away from the body. Fat is a layer of skin. Muscle is not. So when you pinch it, you're pulling that fat and you're measuring the thickness of the fat, okay? Now, if I have somebody that's pretty overweight or on the obese side, I'm not going to do skin fold. You want to avoid that on obese clients. Use BMI instead. But if I could do skin fold, I've got somebody who's pretty much normal, or they're in good shape, they're fit. I want to use skin fold instead of BMI. Does that make sense? Okay, because that obese client, they don't want you grabbing chunks of fat. They just don't. Okay, that's just not comfortable for them. All right, and at the same time, that person who's fit, like if we did my BMI would put me in an obesity class 2. Obesity class 2. I've got 14% body fat. I'm 6'4", almost 300 pounds, and I got a 34-inch waist. Now, how is that obesity class 2? It's not. But that's where the BMI puts me. It's not accurate for people who are larger and have more muscle mass. They used to use it in the military all the time, and they were sending people that were in great shape off to the what they called the fat platoon. At least that's what we called it in the Marine Corps. That's probably not politically correct anymore, but that's what they called it then, okay? And have these people stay there until they lost muscle mass so their BMI was okay, which was ridiculous. You want that guy that looks like Zeus out on the battlefield, right? You know? So the military's gotten away from that as well, which is good. But use skin fold on that normal person and use it on that person who's more fit. Now, if you look at this table 11-6, it shows the different areas that we would measure depending upon which method you use. Now, questions on the test, they're going to talk about, okay, if you're doing an abdominal, it's going to be a vertical fold. If it's a suprailiac, it's an oblique fold. If it's the, let's see here, the chest is oblique as well. There's no horizontal folds. It's either oblique or it's vertical, okay? So make sure you know the difference there. But these are the different places we would measure. If you look at the figure on the left, okay, let's just walk through this. So you've got the pectoralis and you have the bicep. Those are pretty obvious. Right there underneath the pec in the armpit area is what's called the axillary, the mid-axillary. Below that, near the love handle, that's your suprailiac. You have the abdominal in the middle, just to the right of the navel, and then you have the thigh, mid-thigh, okay? Now over on the right, the figure on the right, you have the tricep, and you have what's called the subscapular. So it's that lower ridge of the scapula. Okay, those are the measurements that you would take, or the places you would take the measurements, again, depending upon the method, okay? Does that make sense?
Right.
And you're using these calipers, they're spring-loaded, they're going to squeeze, you're going to take the measurement, pull it off, do it again, make sure they're within, I think it's supposed to be within, 1 to 2 centimeters. No, not centimeters. It's got to be millimeters. 1 to 2 millimeters. Okay, so you got to make sure it's between 1 and 2 millimeters to be able to be an accurate measurement. Now let's turn to page 364. And first of all, look at table 11-7. Okay. You got that one?
Yeah.
Now I want you to read the sites of measurements for women.
Chest, mid-auxiliary, subscapular, triceps, abdomen, suprailiac, and thigh.
Suprailiac and thigh. Okay. Now, so this is what's called the Jackson and Pollock 7-site measurement. You're not going to have to memorize those, but here's the question I'm going to pose to you. You're a man, and you're training a woman. How comfortable is she going to be when you have to take that chest measurement for the body comp?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay? So, because of that, Jackson and Pollock created a 3-site measurement, which is table 11-8. For women, tricep, suprailiac, and thigh. Is she comfortable with that? Yes. Okay? So, get familiar with the sites of the Jackson and Pollock 3-site measurement for men and women. Make sure you know those sites. And then the Duren and Wormsley foresight measurement. So with that one, it's the bicep, tricep, subscapular, and suprailiac on both men and women, okay? That's the one I've used for years. That's the one I still use, all right? Once you have those measurements, whether it's the 3-site or the 4-site, you total those measurements up, and then you go to your chart, and it computes body comp. There is a video, I know, in your system that goes through doing skin fold calipers. So make sure you watch that video. And then also, if anybody at the gym that you work out at does body comp testing with calipers, ask them if they can walk you through it. Okay? Learn from somebody who's been doing it. That's the best way to get to where you're comfortable with those. Okay, so again, BMI on obese, skin fold measurements on normal or fit individuals. Okay, then I would probably do waist to hip. I typically don't do any other measurements. You know, if a person wants me to measure their biceps, I'll do it. Okay, or their chest, I'll do it. But typically I'm not. You know, those are the ones that are the most important. Now, bioelectrical impedance. This is that, you've seen those little handheld things in the gym that you grab hold of and it tells you what your body fat is?
Yeah.
So that's bioelectrical impedance. It sends an electrical current through your body, and the speed at which that current goes through your body is what's going to determine what your body fat is. Because fat impedes the flow of electricity. Water conducts electricity and causes it to flow faster. So all of that muscle that has water in it is going to make that flow fast. Where fat is going to slow it down. Now, the biggest thing with bioelectrical, it's easy. So many people use it. It's not accurate. Because hydration is the important part. If a person is dehydrated, it gives an inaccurate measurement. If they're overhydrated, it gives an inaccurate measurement. Having proper hydration is fundamental for the bioelectrical impedance, and most people are not told what they need to do prior to doing that test. No caffeine, no smoking, no alcohol, no exercise before the test. You want to make sure you're fully hydrated, and then you urinate 30 minutes before the test. Those are the main things, okay? And if you don't follow that, you're not going to have accurate results. Now, all of these have their inaccuracies, okay, granted. But if you stay within the same method, it stays pretty accurate at showing you how much body fat a person has lost. You know, they've gone from 7.3% down to 6.8%, whatever, okay? Now, hydrostatic weighing, a picture of that is on page 368. So it's based on Archimedes' principle, which is a physical law of buoyancy. Basically, it says that fat floats and muscle sinks. Okay? And so you're weighing a person underwater to see how much they float. All right? Very accurate, normally not available. I used to work in a gym that had this years ago, and it was nice because it was a good, accurate measurement. Now, when we get into cardio respiratory, so those are all your anthropometric measurements, which is basically the body for cardiovascular fitness. It is what is absolute at how well the body utilizes oxygen. However, if you're not hooked up to all the monitoring devices, again, in that exercise physiology lab, you're not going to get an absolute VO2 max. So we use different tests. First of all, there's a rating of perceived exertion, 6 to 20, which is the Borg scale, and 1 to 10, which is preferred by NASM. Okay, rating of perceived exertion stands for, or RPE, stands for rating of perceived exertion. How hard is that person working? How hard do we perceive they're working? Okay? Now I'm going to ask you a question there. How many times have you in your life ever been asked, hey, Daryl, on a scale of 6 to 20, how was that meal at that restaurant?
Never.
Never. So I don't get the 6 to 20 scale. I never have. They teach it. It's there. But NASM prefers the 1 to 10 pain scale. And we are always asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, what did you think of this? On a scale of 1 to 10, what did you think of that, right? So people, that makes sense to somebody. Now, the other thing that's nice about the 1 to 10 scale is if you're at a 1, you're at 10% intensity. If you're at a 2, you're at 20%, a 3 at 30%, a 4 at 40%, and so on, okay? So it makes that a lot easier working with. Now, there's 3 different cardiovascular tests that are common. One is the YMCA 3-minute step test. Here, a person steps up and down on a 12-inch box for 3 minutes, 96 steps per minute, and then we measure what's called the recovery rate. Now, the recovery rate is right away. I'm going to start checking their heart rate, and I'm going to count it for an entire 60 minutes or 60 seconds because the heart rate is going to slow down considerably. And we want to see what that recovery rate is. That's what the YMCA step test is based on. It's good for low risk, apparently healthy, non-athletic adults. Those bullet points right there, you remember those, you'll get that right, okay? Now the Rockport walk test. We're going to walk 1 mile as fast as you can. No running. Walk as fast as possible without running. Now, it may be necessary to pace a person because they may be going a little bit too fast or they may be going a little bit too slow. But this is good for unfit individuals. So that person who's never exercised before, that person who maybe is older, the couch potato, whatever, okay? You know, anyone who's unfit, the Rockport walk test is what we want to use. The 1.5 mile run test, we're going to go run 1.5 miles as fast as they can. Now, this one is going to be for a more fit population, okay? So the populations that these tests are for is going to be a critical piece of what you're going to see on the test, okay? Questions over those?
No.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to go to what's called the talk test. Now, the talk test, it seems like I'm missing something here. Hold on a second. I guess I'm not. All right. That comes later. Okay. So the talk test is basically what we're going to do here is we're going to determine a person's effort by how they can talk. And so if a person can talk easily, no signs of exertion, very comfortable, they are below what's called VT1. Okay, and I'm going to explain these different levels to you here in just a bit. When they get into VT1, this is where talking becomes challenging, and they're showing signs of exertion. Now, talking could be challenging to very difficult to where all they can say are short phrases, but they're still in that VT1. When they go over and they cross the threshold, they move into VT2. This is where talking is not able. They're not able to talk. They're focusing on breathing. They're working so hard, almost maximal effort, near maximal effort. They're working so hard that they have to focus on breathing, and any talking is going to be one word or grunts. Okay? Now, why this is important? Okay, so below VT1, it's going to take you up to about 40% intensity. This is casual walking. This is going out and taking a stroll around the lake. You are burning more body fat than you are carbohydrates for energy. It's low intensity energy exercise. You're burning a higher amount of fat. If you remember back to the chapter on energy, chapter 8, it talked about this. Okay, we're in that area where it's low intensity. Now, when we cross over into VT1, it now becomes moderate to vigorous intensity. Moderate would be the lower half of VT1. Vigorous would be the upper half of VT1. Okay? And when we're in that VT1, now we're burning an equal mix of carbohydrates and fats. The bigger difference is this, is when I'm in VT1, I'm burning calories at twice the rate as if I were below VT1. So it's much, much more efficient at burning calories and utilizing that energy that we're looking to expend. Now, both of those, VT1 and below VT1, those are both aerobic exercise. Okay? Even though I'm not working very hard and I'm on that low intensity side, it's still aerobic. I'm still using oxygen for energy. When I cross over and I get into VT2, now I move into anaerobic exercise, high intensity exercise. So high intensity interval training, sprinting, things that are going to be short burst activities, 2 minutes or less you have energy for. Okay? When I'm below VT2, I haven't crossed that threshold yet. When I'm below VT2, I have basically enough ATP being produced that I can go forever. But when I cross over into VT2, I now don't have enough ATP being produced. It will expend itself within 2 minutes. Okay? So this is an easy way to tell how hard a person is working again. And are they in that sweet spot where they're burning a good amount of calories, they're really getting some good cardiovascular conditioning going? Are they above that, or are they below that? Okay? All right, and we'll talk a lot more about VT1 and VT2 as we go through. We get chapter 12 up, and we'll start on it. Is where I'm going to look at the body without movement. The person is just going to be standing facing me. I'm going to look, and I'm going to see if it is exactly the way it should be. If the shoulders are level, if the hips are level, if the spine is straight, if the knees are in a straight line, or are they bowed in or bowed out, okay? These are all things we want to be looking for in that individual on this static assessment. Now, why this is important is because this is what's going to determine muscular imbalances. And because if the muscles are out of balance, they're going to act upon the body, and they're going to move the skeletal system to a position that's not normal. So look at page 385, and there's 3 diagrams at the top that shows what you're looking for and the checkpoints from the front, the side, and the rear view. Okay? So you can see how the shoulders are level. You can see how the spine is straight, the head is straight. The legs are straight from the hips down to the ankles. So the knees aren't bowed in, they're not bowed out. There's no excessive flexion or extension in the knee. There's no excessive flexion or extension in the ankle. Okay? So this is what we'd be looking for. You will see all kinds of stuff. You will see shoulders tilted. You will see hips tilted. You will see backs with excessive curvature. You'll see shoulders rounded forward, people slouching, almost hunchback. These are all the things we want to look for, okay? And static means they're just standing normally. Feet should be straight ahead. They shouldn't be pigeon-toed or duck-footed. That's the sign of internal or external rotation of the hip. The interesting thing with all this, these are all correctable things. We can fix all this. If the shoulders aren't level, if the feet aren't tracking, if the knees are bowed in or bowed out, all of that's fixable by working with the muscles of the body. Because the way the muscles act on the skeleton determines where that skeleton is positioned. Okay, are you following me so far?
Yes. Actually,
right.
I went over this yesterday with this guy's a chiropractor, and the chart actually, he wasn't doing any assessments, but the chart lines up. Like he was saying, like the ear go down to the shoulder, like how the ear hole should be aligned with the shoulder and such.
Huh? So it was somebody you were watching doing that?
Yeah, he had us do it. He had us do assessments on each other. So he was talking about.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. How did yours turn out?
Actually, I needed long story short, I have like a muscle imbalance, like with the middle. Like I don't use my middle back, so I'm getting lower back pain. So he had me do some exercise. Yeah.
So did you have more of a curvature in the upper back? Is that what it was?
Yeah, like I think I forgot he had me. He was seeing if I can get like a full like a 360 or like
Yep.
when I race.
Yep. So your thoracic spine.
Yeah.
I've got the same problem. Okay, like I can lie on my back, and I can't my hands will not touch the ground over my head if my arms are straight. Okay, that is shoulder mobility and thoracic mobility, and I'm working on that. I'm doing a lot of mobility movements, and it's getting better. It's improving quite a bit. Okay, so understanding this and understanding how this works on the body is absolutely critical. It used to be that if somebody was bow-legged or they were knock-kneed, it's like, oh, you're jacked up. We got to put braces on your legs. And you don't. You can fix it by strengthening and stretching muscles. If you're pigeon-toed or duck-footed, you can change that by strengthening and stretching muscles. When you start to understand all this, it really starts to open your eyes and think, wow, cool. That's a lot of stuff I can do. Okay? Now, the three common distortion patterns that we talk about are the pes planus distortion, the lower cross syndrome, and the upper cross syndrome. Okay? Now, the pes planus is where we have the knock knee. The knees are caving in. Okay? The knees are caving in. And what's happening there predominantly is the adductors, the muscles on the inner thigh, are really tight and strong. And they're pulling those knees in toward the midline of the body, which is what the adductor does, right? It brings the legs toward the midline of the body. And so consequently, the gluteus medius and the abductors are being pulled and stretched and weakened, allowing that to happen. So what do? We strengthen those abductors and we stretch the adductors. And when you do that, you can change that position of the knee. And I'm telling my girlfriend's daughter has pes planus really bad. And you see it a lot in women. You do. I mean, when you're out in the community, look at people. Do assessments on the way people walk, the way they stand, the way they sit. Do postural assessments on them. Get used to that. Get comfortable with that. But when I saw that and she asked me, is there anything you can do to fix that? And I said, yeah, actually so. And I looked at her daughter and I said, you can't stretch your legs out to the side and go forward with the splits, can you? Oh, no, not even close. Exactly. Her adductors are extremely tight. So we started stretching. We started working on that, started strengthening those abductors, okay, by doing some different exercises I gave her, and it got better, okay? Doing clamshells, okay, where you got the loop band around your knee, and you take the legs out and back in, take them out and back in. Now, if a person is having this issue, chances are when they squat, knees are caving in, okay? Because it's just pulling that way. It's pulling that way. And when you see the knees cave in, you know that they have that issue. You know that those adductors are tight and overactive, we call it. They're overactive. They're contracting more than what they should. And that the abductors are loose, stretched, and weak, which would be considered underactive. So think about how the muscles work on the skeletal structure, and it will help lead you to understanding a lot of these distortions. Then we look at the lower cross and the upper cross syndrome. The lower cross syndrome has got that kind of arched, sway back, big butt, okay, and big stomach. All right? You see that. You see that in people, especially people that are carrying a lot of weight in their stomach, probably have kind of a bubble butt as well. And they're going to have that sway back. They have that lower cross syndrome. What's happening there is the pelvis is tilting forward. And then when we look at the upper cross syndrome, this is real common anymore because of the cell phones and computers and working at desk, playing video games. You know, so many people are developing that upper cross syndrome where they're hunched over, they're in this position, okay? And that's what's happening with that. And so we want to be able to understand what muscles are causing these problems and how to fix them. All right? So what I want you to do here, okay, and I want you to keep working on your Section 3 test. And let's get that Section 3 test up to 85%. But I also want you to start really looking at these three syndromes, pes planus, lower crossed, and upper crossed, and study the muscle imbalances. What muscles are overactive, meaning they're pulling the body in that direction? And you can always think of an overactive as this: is if I contract my pecs, I can pull my shoulders forward, right? And when I pull my shoulders forward, I round my shoulders forward, I can feel my pecs being tight, but I can also feel those muscles across the middle part of my back stretching. So tight, opposite muscle is stretching. Whatever is tight, the opposite muscle will be stretching. Okay?
Right.
So study these muscle groups and try to get a good understanding about what's happening with the body there. Okay?
All right.
All right. And then I will see you